Hari Om. Vakratunda Mahakaya Surya Koti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaste friends. Welcome to session 146 of Bhagavad Gita verse by verse. Today we are going to have a revision of verses 1 to 49 of the chapter 18, which we completed in our previous session. Srimati Indumati Venkat is going to chant Lingashtakam later at the end of the class. Now, I request Dr. Hegde sir to give an introduction to the day's class before we begin the recap. Hegde sir, please.
Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Having completed the study of the Bhagavad Gita verse by verse, let us look into the greatness of the Bhagavad Gita. The Vedas are voluminous. Fortunately for us, Sri Krishna has condensed the wisdom of the Vedas into the Bhagavad Gita in 700 verses. Adi Shankara in his Bhashyam has very clearly stated that the study of the Gita is as good as the study of the entire Vedic knowledge. The other relevance of the Bhagavad Gita study by us is that it is a manual for people steeped in worldly issues. Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata composed by Vyasacharya. It is in the form of a dialogue between Lord Krishna and Arjuna. And just as democracy is of the people, for the people, and by the people, the Gita is written by a householder, a grihastha, Vyasacharya, or a householder, Arjuna, and delivered by a householder, Lord Krishna. And so very specifically relevant for all of us. The Gita deals with several topics like karma yoga, meditation, on values, on bhakti, and different people can take different aspects based on how they see the Bhagavad Gita. But Adi Shankara has directed our attention. He clearly points out that the Bhagavad Gita is a manual for Moksha Shastra. In Sanskrit, he says the Tatparyam, or the central theme of the Bhagavad Gita, is to give us self-knowledge, Brahma Vidya or Atma Vidya, as a means for moksha, as a means for Parama Purushartha or liberation. Adi Shankara again in the Bhagavad Gita has said, Bhagavad Gita Kinchidadita. Studying of the Bhagavad Gita, and I'll go to the last line, Priyate Tasya Yamenana Charcha. That means, those who have studied the Bhagavad Gita, once you understand your true nature, you have no more business with Yama Dharmaraja, in the sense you understand your immortal nature. A deep sense of gratefulness to Vyasacharya and the scribe Lord Ganesha, from whom we have got the Bhagavad Gita. We are so fortunate that we have been able to study the Bhagavad Gita initially as a 20-week summary. So the 18th chapter was studied every week, and the second chapter and the 18th chapter, we divided it into two. Once that was over, we took the next big project, which lasted almost 2 years, is to study the Gita verse by verse. In the beginning of last year, we started a new venture called Disha, where we study the Gita once again to be able to study the verses to see how we can derive inner strength and happiness. And finally, at the request of the School of Ancient Wisdom, many of us got an opportunity to make a summary of each chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Why are we studying the Gita? Is it for any form of scholarship? Clearly not. We are not here to study the Gita to have our ego fulfilled that I have studied the Bhagavad Gita. That is not the objective. But our objective is to see how the Gita has been able to transform our day-to-day lives. In our day-to-day lives, we encounter many upsetting situations. And perhaps one of the most upsetting situations is the news of the death of someone we love, sometimes somebody close to us, and maybe at some stage our own lives. Again, the same quotation from the Bhajagovindam, Samprapte sannihite kale nahi nahi rakshati dukrin karane. Dukrin karane refers to non-spiritual knowledge. That means any form of apara vidya, including medical knowledge and all forms of worldly knowledge. You may be well versed in all aspects of medicine, but when you have that pang, that anxiety about the proximity to death, we will realize all forms of worldly knowledge become utterly useless. And that is where this study of the Bhagavad Gita can make all the difference. I will look into a few verses of the Bhagavad Gita, which, for that matter, any verse of the Bhagavad Gita is so rich. Swami Dayananda had said that the opening teaching verse, Asochanam anvasochastvam, Prajna Vadamsa Bhasase Gatasu na Gatasumcha Nanu Sochanti Panditaha. That means those who have spiritual wisdom, and hopefully by the study of the Gita, we have been able to get that tatparya, the essence, which is our true knowledge. And once we have our true knowledge, we will experience unpleasant situations, but we won't go into a grief mode. And even if there is an unpleasant situation, we are able to recover much faster. Why is that so? If you study the Bhagavad Gita, this is the message of all the Gita. Self-ignorance is the cause of all problems, and self-knowledge is the way out. Atma ajnanam samsara karanam, Atma Jnanam Moksha Karanam. Moksha is possible this moment and from now on for the rest of our life. Once I discover my true nature, I discover my immortal nature. By now we know we are all a mixture of body, mind, and Atma. I have lived in many bodies. These bodies come and go. These are only means for me to communicate, but my true nature is Atma, which is the same nature as Bhagavan. I have been there from the very beginning. I will be there till the very end. This verse 16, Swamiji calls is one of the deepest verses of the entire Bhagavad Gita. Nasato vidyate bhava, na bhavo vidyate sataha, which means that which has come into existence or that which is existent. For example, we know for all of us, I am. I means consciousness, am means existence. And this verse says, if you are existent now, you will continue to be existent for all time. And there is no question of becoming non-existent at any time ever. That which is existent will continue to be existent, and that which is non-existent will remain non-existent. That is not a problem. Now the distinction, that is why asato ma sadgamaya. And remember always, asato refers not to that which is not existent, but that which appears to exist. My body, mind, and the world of my experiences come under the definition of apparently existent. Let us give less and less importance to Maya or that which is apparently existent and shift to that which is there all the time. So my Atma is real, my Anatma is unreal. So the whole shift of Asato Ma is from that which appears to be real to that which is real. Right in the beginning of the second chapter, Sri Krishna has got an important verse to Arjuna, who's struggling because of his mental upset on the battlefield. And this beautiful verse, Matra sparsha sukhaunteya sitoshna sukadukadaya agama pahino anityaha tam stitakshasva bharata. The moment you enter your body. That means you put on this costume of body, mind, and you interact with the world around. You will experience pleasant, unpleasant, hot, cold. But remember, the only way is to be mentally strong. And that is why titiksha is the way out. Because agama pahino anitya, all that we experience is anitya. I have been there from the very beginning. The experiencer in me is the reality, and so don't worry at all. Sometimes you will see those verses that you've had an opportunity to study and present will appear to you as some of the most beautiful verses ever. And this verse, which I had an opportunity to study, buddhi yukto jahatiha ube sukrute dushkrute. This is the pinnacle of karma yoga. The pinnacle of karma yoga is what? Yoga karmasu kaushalam. That means whatever activity that I do, how do I do it skillfully? The skill in action is doing it in such a way that you do not incur punya or papa. And how do you do it? Buddhi yuktaha. Anchor in the spiritual wisdom that I am no longer body, mind. And therefore, I give up both punya or papa. And then I am free from the sense of doership. That is when we understand what is inaction in action. Although through my guidance, through my presidency, through me, so much is happening, but actually I am not doing anything at all. The message of the whole Bhagavad Gita we have to infer is Brahma Satyam Jagan Nitya Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. And how do we get that message of the Bhagavad Gita? Again, we see that sometimes whenever we experience difficult verses, we have to see that there could be different levels of reality. There is one level of reality, of a dream reality. That means when we are going through dream, that experience is real, and that level is called pratibhasika. The moment my dream comes to an end, I wake up to another level of reality, what is called vyavahara. And through spiritual wisdom, we awaken to a new level called paramarthika. This awakening does not happen as suddenly as the dream world disappearing and coming to this waking world. Once spiritual knowledge comes, very slowly and without even our knowledge, we log on to paramarthika. That means I am able to experience this world, but suddenly the way I see the world now becomes different. I don't give too much importance to the world, as given in this beautiful verse, Yanisha sarva bhutanam tasya jagrita samyami. That means the way a person with spiritual knowledge looks at the world compared to a person who does not have spiritual knowledge is a day-night difference. Why? Because a person with spiritual knowledge does not give too much importance to the world, to the body, mind, which all come under the definition of anitya or nitya or anatma, and gives more importance to that which cannot be experienced, but that is the experiencer. These are the very profound verses, and if these verses are studied, it can make a transformation that we continue to live in the same world as everybody else, but the perspective that we have is different. The objective is we have got the Gita through our Guru. We have understood godliness. We have discovered our true nature, and let us be able to go across, just like a pole vaulter is able to go across. Now, the real transition is how we are able to go through this mind block and declare, I have always been free and I will always be free. The last verse of the Bhagavad Gita, which we will touch again in the final summary, which will happen next week, where Sri Krishna in his final advice is Sarva Dharman Parityagya. Sarva Dharman Parityagya should be interpreted as Sarva Karman. That means Buddhi Yukta. Don't have a sense of doership. Give up all sense of doership. Mam Ekam Sharanam Raja. Ekam here refers move from the triangular format to the binary format, where you discover there are only two things in the world, Atma and Anatma. Atma is real, Anatma is the world of appearance. And once we come into the binary format, then immediately, because I have disidentified from the body-mind, all my karmas become irrelevant. Aham tvam sarva papi bhu. My karma account becomes irrelevant. And Lord Krishna says, don't worry, don't feel sorrowful. Moksha is now your birthright. We will look at a summary by 4 of the speakers. To each of you, I will request you to make a presentation very comfortably. We have time. The opening set of first 12 verses will be by Dr. Ravi Shankar. Dr. Ravi Shankar, please.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Lot of verses are shown as a nutshell in the second chapter, which is the essence of the Gita. This is the bird's eye view, the Upakrama Sankshepa. And then there has been a magnification of the verses from the 3rd to the 17th chapter, which is Vikstaraha. We come back to the 18th chapter, which is the Upasamhara Sankshepa, looking at the same areas with a very close look. We move to the next slide, and we see that in the 13th to the 18th chapter, the essence is Jnana Yoga, enlightenment, the Asipadartha, the Aikyam, the Sadguna, the Sadachara is highlighted in the Charanma Shataka. As we move on, we come back to the battlefield. And Arjuna is in real trouble right from the 2nd chapter. He continues to be so right here. And he wants to be the escapist sannyasa. He wants to be the runaway sannyasa because he wants the ashrama sannyasa. The important point for us to know is karma yoga itself is the real sannyasa. And karma yoga is that in which raga dvesha is completely renounced. That kind of a karma yoga is sannyasa. Sam plus ni plus as ashyati is to throw away, which is sannyasa. Tyajati is to give away, to give up is tyagaha. This is the confusion that Arjuna continues to have. And so in the first verse, he asks, please explain what is the difference between sannyasa and tyaga. In the next verse, Sri Bhagavano Vacha, Lord Krishna explains that some sages and scholars have given an explanation about the vihita and the naimitya karmas, which are the compulsory and the occasional karmas. And these types of karma should never be missed. They should always be done. Unlike the kamya, the nishidha, and the prayaschitta karmas, which are occasional, which can be done for various particular reasons. Then comes the question of what is sannyasa. And some sages and scholars say total renunciation of action is sannyasa, whereas the renunciation of the results of desire-born action is tyaga. In the next verse, Sri Krishna continues to say that the sages and scholars give an explanation to this question: can a spiritual seeker give up nitya and naimitya karmas at all? And he says, only when you give up all the karmas can you have really the time for all the spirituality. And he continues to say, yajna, dhyana, tapa karmas na tajyam. There are no way that these things can be given up. Yajna, charity and austerity. In the next verse, Sri Krishna says, Nischayam shrunu me tatra tyage bharatasya tama. Oh, the greatest amongst the descendants of Bharata, understand that renunciation is indeed 3 types. And he continues to tell that this is the most important. In the next verse, Lord Krishna is continuing to tell us that the most important foundation of Vedic teaching is to clearly understand that the definition of sannyasa is based on the target audience. The sannyasa for a prepared mind is different from that of an unprepared mind, which is represented by Arjuna, who is most of us. So yajna karma, dana karma, tapa karma needs to be done. And these are means of purification of the mind, which is pavanani. And this is very well understood by a manishinam, an intelligent human being, a person who has got a discriminative mind. Later on in the Shankara Bhashya, there is a mention that one may renounce these kind of karmas only when there is jnana yogyata prapti, not till then. And Pujya Paramarthananda Swamiji has very clearly reinforced that Krishna has highlighted these words from about Danam as an injunction from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The next verse. Yajna dana tapaha kartavyani necessarily have to be practiced. And how do we do it? Not to get attached to these religious karmas. Sangam tyaktva. So the path is that we enter these yajna dana tapaha, purify ourselves. Only then can we get into Vedanta Shravana Manana Nididhyasana. And they, of course, have a benefit, which could be both spiritual and material. And this specific verse, Lord Krishna is saying, Nishchitartham mama uttamam. This is my considered and the best teaching of all over Arjuna. And he further says that these spiritual benefits are amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa, shanti, abhaya sattva, sattva samshuddhi, which are all the part of the Daivi Sampat. And we also get a competent guru to take us forward and give us inner transformation. In the next verse, there is an explanation of what are those types of renunciation. Ignorance is tamoguna. Never renounce yajna, dana, tapaha, or the panchamaha yajnas, all the niyata karmas. They must be done. But those who renounce these nitya karmas due to ignorance, mohatasya parityagaha, are the tamasic sannyasas. In the next verse, Lord Krishna says, attachment is rajoguna. Those of us who have forgotten the higher I and continue to dwell on the lower I, this ego and the body, and for the concern of the mind, for the concern of the body, the mind starts giving excuses. We have a misplaced renunciation for those physical attachments, and that is the rajasic sannyasa. They never give us any benefits for such a renunciation. In the next verse, we come to this sattvic person for whom the gold medal is moksha. And he knows that he is not yet prepared, but he wants that gold medal of moksha. He requires the self-knowledge. He requires purity of mind. He requires sattvic karmani. And for him, the means will never be a pain because he has got a very clear vision of his end in the mind. Karyam I have to do. Iti niyatam karya kriyate. And these are sattvic karmas, which is yajna, dana, tapa, and the panchamahayagnyas. And they give us chitta shuddhi or jnanam, which is spiritually elevating. And they have to be done with a sangam tattva for the action and for the phalam. Clearly, later on, Sri Krishna says, sarva dharma api parityajya. Don't get attached to anything. And of course, the benefits are more spiritual, but you also have the avantara phalam. Like a mango tree not only gives us mangoes, but also gives us shade, a place for the birds to rest, and the leaves and the trunk. Such a person is the sattvic person, the sattvic sannyasa. In the next verse, Sri Krishna has further highlighted that the prepared student who has Jnana Yoga and Sadhana Chatushtaya Samvarna is almost like a Sattvic Sanyasa, versus an unprepared student who is full of Raga, Dvesha, Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya. And so a Para Apakari Karmani is a Tamasic Karmani who has spiritual downfall. A Para Udasina Karmani is a Rajasic Karmani who has spiritual stagnation. Whereas the Sattvic Sannyas, the one who does the Para Upakari Karmani, is the Sattvika Karmani who has and who goes into spiritual progression. In the next slide, Krishna wants Arjuna to take up Karma Yoga, and Arjuna continues to refuse. Hence, Krishna is presenting these verses, which are the same as the Karma Yoga, as Sattvic Sannyasa, knowing well that probably Arjuna will enjoy this sannyasi's peace of mind. And so the corollary is Sattvic Sannyasa is the same as Karma Yoga, which is Yajna, Dana, and Tapaha minus the Phalam. We move on to understand this question. How does a Karma Yogi do his duties, a Sattvic Sannyasa? He will not renounce his duty, but he will do them in a way where he doesn't hate it and never complains. Akushalam karma na dveshti. Neither does he get attached to the pleasant duties. Kushale na anusajjate. And he renounces all the anxieties and the attachment to the action, to the phala, as well as to the anxieties of the future. Sangam tyagaha and phala tyagaha. So he has a balanced attitude. He's a Sattvic Antakarana person, a Sattvic Samavishtaha, and has Vedantic qualifications. Are there any indications for such a refinement? We would understand it that the Vedantic studies has more relevance in our lives. Vedanta becomes more interesting and is better understood. And we spend more time in Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. For that matter, Tyagi Sattva Samavishtaha Medhavi Chinna Samshaya. We are free of all doubts. And so we know that we have moved from Karma Yoga to Jnana Yogyata to Jnana Yoga, which leads to liberation. In the next slide, which is the 11th verse. The question is, total renunciation of karmas, is it ever possible? Nahi deha bartha shakyam taktyum karma na sheshataha. Sheshata taktyum na shakyam. There is no way that there could be total renunciation of all the karmas. We are aware of the devarinas, the pitrarinas, the rishirinas. So the only way out is to change the type of karma, to reduce certain karmas, and to give up the anxiety regarding the karma and the karma phala, which is karma phala tyagi bhava and the prasada bhava. Such a person is a tyagi, saha tyagi. He alone is the sattvic tyagi, a person who has karma yogi, who is a true karma yogi. As we move on, the question comes, if I refuse to be a karma yogi, what happens? And Sri Krishna says in this 12th verse, such a person becomes a karmi. There is no Ishvara arpana, there is no prasada bhava. They are concerned about the future. The values are compromised. So they have anishtam, ishtam, mishra, papa, punya, phalam. And that gives rise to the 3 types of punarjanmas. Atyaginam bhavati. They go on into janma, marana, and the sukha, dukha, mishra janmas keep coming again and again. After the marana, they go into the different types of adhigata or adogata. So a karma yoginam, these things, kvachit na bhavati. There is no punarjanma. A karma yogi has chitta shuddhi, and sannyasa is therefore karma yogi karma yoga is doing your duty the right way. And so Sri Krishna says, "Oh Arjuna, take up your bow and arrow. Go ahead and do your karma yoga with a proper mindset." Sri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi Shankar, for giving us a very clear summary of the summary. The 18th chapter itself is a summary, and you made an excellent summary of the first 12 verses. We go to Dr. Satyanarayana next, and my request to all the speakers is to continue. I will not come in between each speaker, so that each of you will be able to make your presentation in a more, with a little more time. Dr. Satyanarayana, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Jnana Yoga has been elaborately discussed earlier in chapter 2, 4, and 5. And Krishna is summarizing the essence of these chapters in verses 18.13 to 18.17. In verse 18.13, Krishna says, "O Arjuna, now learn from me about the 5 factors that have been mentioned for accomplishment of all actions in the doctrine of Sankhya, which explains how to stop the reactions of karma. Every individual is a mixture of achetana amsha, that is inert principle, and chetana amsha, the sentient principle. We do not recognize this because only the inert alone is visible and tangible, while the consciousness principle is invisible and unavailable to the sense organs." In previous classes, we have known the nature of Atma, or the consciousness. Next slide, please. So Atma, our consciousness, is not a part, property, or a product of body. It is an independent principle which pervades and enlivens the body. It is not limited by the boundaries of the body, and it continues to survive even after the death of the body. And surviving consciousness is not available for transaction. So what are the stages of spiritual sadhana? First stage is recognizing Atma and Anatma as 2 different parts. And then second stage is gradually identifying more and more with Atma part and disidentifying with Anatma part. Jnana Yoga consists of Shravanam, which gives us knowledge about self, while Mananam makes it doubt-free. In Nitidhyasanam, one should break the habit of identifying with the body and claim consciousness as his nature. What is spiritual sadhana? It is learning to shift our identification from changing material principle to changeless consciousness principle. That is from mortal principle of growing, graying, and going to immortality nature. I am the all-pervading consciousness principle and is not confined to the body. And owning the various features of Atma, such as Akarta and Abhokta. And Krishna emphasizes upon claiming, I am that consciousness. And it is told that Karta produces guilt, Bhokta produces anxiety. So what are these 5 factors necessary for performing all the activities is told in next verse. In verse 18.14, Krishna tells the body, the doer or the soul, the various senses, many kinds of efforts, and the divine providence. These are the 5 factors of action. These 5 factors are classified as anatma because they are made up of matter. And the presence of consciousness is also required for action. However, consciousness does not do any action by itself. So the 5 factors, next slide. Annamaya kosha, corresponding to anatomical, physical, or the visible part of the personality. Pranamaya kosha is physiology or the bodily functional part. Manomaya kosha is psychological or the emotional personality like anger, jealousy, love, compassion, etc. Vijnanamaya kosha is rational or thinking faculty. And lastly, it is Daivam or Adhishtana Devata. Every organ has a presiding deity with whose grace these organs function. And the collective blessings of all these presiding deities is Daivam. So these 4 koshas and the presiding deity principle is known as Hiranyagarbha Tattva. So verse 18.15 and 6, Krishna tells, these 5 are the contributory factors for whatever action is performed, whether it is proper or improper, with body, speech, or mind. Those who do not understand this regard the soul as only doer. With their impure intellect, they cannot see things as they are. Krishna says 5 factors are compulsorily required for all activities, whether they are noble, sacred, secular, or even evil. Human activities are divided into kaika, or the physical activity, vachika, like japa and parayana, manasika, like meditation and upasana. So in verse 18.16, Krishna talks about ignorant persons. Because an Ajnani's mind is afflicted by ignorance, he has a wrong notion that his true nature is the body-mind complex. And because of this spiritual immaturity, he views himself as a karta and not as the actionless Atma. In next verse, 18.17, Krishna tells, those who are free from ego of being the doer and whose intellect is unattached, though they may slay living beings, they neither kill nor they are bound by action. While verse 16 talks about Ajnani, verse 17 talks about a Gnani. A wise person knows that all actions performed by various organs of the body are in an automatic mode. They realize that the Atma is the witness of all actions. They see inaction in action. And talking about Gnani, who is a Gnani? Next slide. A Gnani is one who is exposed to systematic spiritual teaching, one who divides individual into Atma and Anatma. Though through Shravanam and Mananam, he has done body consciousness discrimination, and he gives a strong identification with the body. He gives sufficient importance to the body, but is not obsessed with it. With practiced long nididhyasanam, training the mind to identify with the Atma part, he knows that he is not karta. Hari Om.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Chapter 18 is the summary of Gita. And we are seeing verses 18 to 40 now, which again, within the 18th chapter, it's a reiteration and a revision of the entire Gita teaching. Sri Krishna here concentrates and analyzes on 6 topics: Jnanam, karma, karta, buddhi, drithi, and sukham. These are the 6 topics, and he analyzes each one of them, which can be of 3 types, that is sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. And once we understand this, it's the gist of entire Gita teaching. So at the outset, it looks like a mix of different categories of terms, but there's a structure and pattern to this, which we'll see in this summary. In the next slide, we see the verse number 18. Jnanam gneyam parignata trividha karma chodana karanam karma karteti trividaha karma sangraha. 18th verse. It goes, the knower, knowable, and knowledge. This is the threefold cause of action: the doer, the object, and the instrument. These are the threefold actions. So basically here Sri Krishna concentrates on 2 things. One is the act of knowing, and the second one is act of doing. So this is the transaction what we do in our day-to-day lives. In the next slide, we see what is a transaction, vyavahara. In general terms, in our materialistic world, it is easy to understand a transaction in monetary terms. When somebody gives you money, so there are 3 things happening. There's a person who is a giver, and there's the money, which is the thing which is taken, and there's a taker, that's you who takes the money. So this is for a transaction to happen, 3 things should be there. In the realm of knowing, there are 3 terms: the knower, known, and knowledge. In the realm of doing, again, there are 3 terms: doer, action, and the instrument. So knowing and doing are the only 2 things. If we can analyze anything in this universe, these are the only 2 things which can happen, which happens. is only these two things. If we just neglect these two things, then everything is like kind of pralayam or layam, when there is nothing which is going to, no change. So whenever we perceive this universe, it's because of these two things, because we know and we do. As we see in the next slide, this is the objective of any human pursuit. Take the simple example of in the night, suppose you are sleeping, deep sleep, and you just turn to one side and you just happen to wake up, and suddenly you realize that one of your leg is outside your blanket, and that's the reason why you are feeling chilly. So until you knew that this is existing, you were asleep. Only when you got awake, now that Jnana Shakti came, that now you know that your leg is outside. Then once that Jnana Shakti comes, once you know that there is something, you will develop a raga or dvesha, a desire to take it or to go away from it. Consider an amoeba. If because of the chemical attractants or chemical which is close to it, a unicellular organism, which we would have heard in our high schools. So if that chemical is attractive, if it is food, so it grows pseudopods, that legs around it, and swallows it, engulfs it. And if it is something which is dangerous, it goes away from it. Raga, dvesha. Similarly, what you do, you desire that your leg should be covered. And you do, what do? You pull that blanket in your semi-conscious state, half asleep, you will cover it. That's the Kriya Shakti. So this is the two things which happen in our lives, knowing and doing. In between is the desire, which will bring in raga or dvesha. So this is the only transaction which can happen, knowing and doing. Okay. And if we analyze these two separately, what happens when we take money? The taker takes the taken, which is the money, through a giver. So this is the triputi. Okay. In the realm of knowing, again, there is a triputi. Knower, known, and knowledge. Knower knows the known, gets to know the knowable through knowledge. Similarly, in the realm of doing, action, the doer does the action through an instrument. These three are necessary. Without any one of that, you can't do this transaction. What will happen if you have to send money through PhonePe or Google Pay? These are the three things which will be required. You need the instrument, that's the app. And what it will ask the receiver's details. And what else it will ask? From which bank account you have to transfer. So these are the three things, triputi. So in the next slide, we will analyze each one of this again. In coming to the knowing, these are the technical terms which we will gradually assimilate and gradually internalize, and it will be easy once these are like mathematical tables. Initially, when we read like 12 ones are 12 or 18 ones are 18, it looks like we will have to by heart it. But over time, there won't be any need once you internalize why it is there and what's the meaning of that. So these are the technical terms. Knower knows the knowable through the knowing instrument. So that here it's called knowledge. Pramatha knows the prameyam through pramanam. Or here in this verse 18, Sri Krishna uses parignata, knows the gnayam, the knowable, through Jnanam. So here the Jnanam is that object of knowledge, not the Jnanam of moksha. Okay. So parignata knows the gnayam through Jnanam. Similarly, in the next slide, we can see what happens in action, doing. Karta, karma, and karanam. Karanam, not take it as karanam. Karanam, that's the instrument. Okay, like we hear of upakaranam. Our karanam is what we have in our hands, like the things which is in our body, what we do. Upakarana is like how the surgeon is using the instrument, what he uses outside the body. So that's the karanam. So what happens here? The doer does the action through the doing instrument. The karta does the karma through an instrument called karanam. The subject does the object using an instrument. So these are the three terms, triputis, which we need to No. And then among these 6 items now, okay, that is karta, karma, karanam, and pramata, prameya, pramanam. So among these, Sri Krishna selects 3 of them. And what are those 3? Jnanam, karma, and karta. And he divides. This is just to give an example. He takes these 3. There are other 3, and each one of these items can be divided into 3 types based on our motive. What is our motive in studying Gita? Our motive, Gita is a Moksha Shastra. Our motive of studying Gita is to reach there, spiritual enlightenment. Okay, there be no doubt about it. And why are we dividing this into these 3, Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic? Not because they are there. That's because this is what we have to know, which one to do, which one not to do. Which one will take us towards our goal, which one will take us away from our goal, which one has no benefit in our ultimate goal of reaching moksha. Anything which leads us to spiritual growth is taken as sattvic. Anything which leads us to spiritual downfall is taken as tamasic. Anything which leads us to spiritual stagnation, there is no change at all, that will be called rajasic. So that's the basis. It's not like, again, here like mathematical tables. There's a reason why they have put like that. Okay, it's not like there are 3 times some things which you should like, something we should not like, which you should do, we should not do. There's a purpose for it. The purpose is our spiritual growth. So we have to pick those which are sattvic, because what we need is spiritual growth. Why we are here, why we are studying Gita is just because of that. So, and we have to avoid those which will lead us to spiritual downfall. It's like a game of snakes and ladders. Every time if you fall into that tamasic, it's like a snake which will take you down into downfall. Anything which is sattvic will take you higher in the road to spiritual achievement. So here in actually in this 18th chapter, Sri Krishna divides 7 topics into sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. About Sanyasa, renunciation, Dr. Ravi Shankar spoke earlier in this session, which are dealt in topics in verses 7, 8, and 9. Renunciation of results of Nitya Karmas is Sattvic. Renunciation of Nitya Karmas due to fear of bodily strain is Rajasic. Renunciation of Nitya Karmas due to the ignorance of their value is Tamasic. That we saw. Now we are going to see the next 6 items. The 6 things which are again divided for our convenience and understanding into Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic. Jnanam, the knowledge, that by which one sees the undivided self in and through all the beings, which is described in verse 20, is Sattvic Jnanam. That because of which one takes the self to be distinct in every being. They won't see the oneness. They see each one, they respect others. There's like give respect and take respect. Each one is equal, but they see the distinctness, like I am separate, you are separate. That is Rajasic. The third one, Tamasic knowledge, is that because of which one takes the body as the self. That's the Charvaka philosophy. You live only once, like that kind of, you only live once, YOLO. So that he takes the body as the self, and nothing which is not perceived by my 5 senses does not exist. It's like animalistic attitude in which you gather, and not bothered about anything else, anybody else. That's the Tamasic Jnanam. Karma, coming to action, again 3 divisions. Duty performed without attachments and expectations. In verse 23, it is highlighted. That is Sattvic Karma. Action done with egoism for the sake of results. I build a temple, but when every tubelet you put in there, you have to put my name written in a permanent marker. So that is a result. You're seeing, you're doing an action. You're building a temple, but there's an egoism there. You're doing it for the sake of results. That is Rajasic action. And then Tamasic action is indiscriminate action done without considering the consequences, as an impulsive behavior. That is Tamasic action. And in the doers also, Karta, there are three types. One who is detached, perseverant, enthusiastic, unassuming, calm in both success and failure. He is a sattvic doer, sattvic karta. A rajasic karta, he is attached, greedy, harmful. And whenever there is success, he gets abnormally elated. And when there is a failure, he goes into depression. That is rajasic karta. And what about tamasic karta? He is undisciplined, uncultured, arrogant, harmful, dull, and procrastinating. So these are the three things which we should know: Jnanam, karma, and karta. And he extends further, as we see in the next slide, for three more things, which is again divided by Lord Krishna into three: sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. Buddhi, the intellect. What is sattvic buddhi? That which knows dharma and adharma, right and wrong, as well as bondage and liberation. They know what will take us towards bondage, what will take us out of this bondage, liberation. The rajasic buddhi, rajasic intellect, it knows a bit of dharma and adharma, what is right and wrong, because it's there in the rule book, because it's there mentioned in the constitution, in the law, that much they know. But what is bondage, what is liberation, they are ignorant about it. But the tamasic, he knows dharma, adharma, but in an opposite way. Dharma he considers as adharma, and adharma he considers as dharma. And drithi, the free will, our will, again divided into three. That will by which one sustains the functions of all organs in the spiritual path. That, in other words, is through yoga, which is made unswerving through yoga, which is said in verse 33, is the will which is sattvic. And the rajasic will is that by which one pursues dharma, artha, kama, craving for the benefits. What is dash dash missing here? Moksha. He is not seeing moksha at all here. The rajasic drithi is seeing only three purusharthas: dharma, artha, kama, not the moksha. And the tamasic drithi is that by which one does not give up sleep, fear, grief, and indulgence. That is tamasic. So that naturalistic attitude, animalistic attitude in which that fear, grief, indulgence, sleep does not go away is tamasic. And curiously, the happiness, the sukham, is also divided into three. What are the pleasures which is acceptable for our spiritual growth, which will not help in our spiritual growth, it just stagnates, and that happiness, that pleasure which will lead to a spiritual downfall. Again, these three: sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. So that sukham, which is like a poison in the beginning, that root to sukham, but it becomes nectar in the end, and which is born of self-knowledge, is that sattvic sukham. That's the actually, in other words, this is the ananda, the ultimate ananda, that is mentioned in verse 37. That happiness, which is the absolute happiness, the ananda, is sattvic happiness. Whereas the reflected ananda comes under this rajasic and tamasic, which may lead you to spiritual stagnation or downfall. That which is like nectar in the beginning, but like poison in the end, which is born out of contact between sense organs and objects, like eating a sweet. At that moment, you are feeling that like a nectar. So that which happens when there is a contact between sense organs and objects, that's the rajasic sukham. And that which dilutes the mind in the beginning and also in the end, which is born out of indolence, laziness, and negligence, that is tamasic sukham. So these are the tables which we should know, and which becomes like a habit, which becomes like so natural once we understand, once we delve into this sattvic line of thinking. So it becomes so easy to understand the logic, how these are classified. So we see in the next slide, what we need to, the take-home message is this: anything in this world which leads to a spiritual growth is sattvic. Anything which leads to spiritual stagnation is rajasic. And anything which leads to spiritual downfall is tamasic. Till we know what leads to growth or downfall or stagnation, we need to go by these rules. We need to go by these tables. And once we know the moksha, when we are nearing it, it becomes very natural to know what is that which leads us to growth or downfall. And in the end, Sri Krishna says in verse 40 that there's no such entity in the world, or again, even among the gods in heaven, which can be free from these three gunas, the gunas of sattvic, rajasic, tamasic, which are born of nature. So anything and everything you take around you, whichever in the realm of knowing or in the realm of doing, can be divided into these three. Because we are students who are in search of liberation. We are mumukshus. We want to be there. That's why, like a person who is on diet, you have to be on this diet of sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. And you have to just disregard those tamasic things which will lead you like a snake to spiritual downfall. And you should just pick up, because your time is limited in this janma, in this, when you are in that path, to pick those things which are sattvic, which will take you like a ladder to spiritual growth. In the next slide, I said, this is the summary of the entire Gita, the Moksha Shastra. So I told about the transaction, what happens. Transaction, which happens only in the two realms of knowing and doing. Suppose you take 10 rupees from your trouser pocket and put it into your shirt pocket. What's the transaction which happened here? You took it out from one pocket, you held it in your hand and put it in your other pocket, other pocket. Who do you debit and who do you credit here? Where are the two accounts? As long as you consider there are three entities, that's the triputi, only then a transaction will happen. Once you consider, once you grow, once you expand yourself to engulf the entire universe, whatever action happens, whatever knowledge happens within is just like moving things from one pocket to another pocket. There's no action which is actually happening. There's the inaction within this action which is happening. Unless you create these three accounts, these three triputis, there's no transaction which happens, either in knowing or in doing. That is moksha. Knowing that there is nothing which actually happens. It's only because of in our day-to-day life, in our vyavaharika, we create these accounts. We have pockets. We bring it out and put it in some other pocket. It's like those waves in an ocean which just happily, just for no reason, goes this way, that way, but the ocean remains ocean. So this is the gist which actually summarizes the entire Gita in these many verses from 18 to 40. Thank you very much. Hari Om.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. So in the following verses, that is verses 41 to 49, Sri Krishna summarizes the entire Karma Yoga, that is the third chapter, in the light of Swabhava and Swadharma. Every individual has his own inborn nature, which is Swabhava, and to make it effective in his life is his duty, which is Swadharma. We often wonder, we've heard so much about, Karma Yoga, how are we to achieve those attributes which we are always talking about, which the Gita is talking about? That is Ishvara Prasad Bhava, Ishvara Arpana Bhava, and more importantly, inaction in action. Such attributes of a Karma Yogi become natural to a person only if it is done according to Swabhava and Swadharma. So everybody in this life has to go through this Karma Yoga part, which is an extrovert life. That's the life we lead most of our lives. And we are constantly indebted to this creation because, from through the air we breathe, through the food we eat, through the water we drink, from the moment we are born, we are indebted. And all of us have an opportunity to contribute through the work that we do. But how do we use these worldly activities for spiritual growth is entirely up to us. Through the right action and right attitude in every thought, word, and deed. So this is what prepares our mind for Jnana Yogyata Prapti. Our external growth depends completely on bhoga, that is our possessions and acquisitions. But our inner growth depends on tyaga, as we've heard, through the renunciations. So we have an opportunity, like Dr. Ravi Shankar told about the karmas, nitya karmas, which we should not give up. That is the Pancha Mahayajna, which is a wonderful way of making spiritual progress on a day-to-day basis. In the next slide, all of us as human beings are governed by our gunas, well-defined characteristics which are determined by the gunas and not by our birth. Now, if we consider the gunas to be the measuring rods or the yardsticks of the qualities, the entire humanity can be classified into 4 varnas: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. So this chart is an indicative chart where we can see the preponderance of the guna, which is what classifies the person into a particular varna. So the Brahmana varna has 80% sattvic guna, and to a lesser extent the rajasic and tamasic. The Kshatriya and the Vaishya guna have 80% rajasic guna, and the varying degrees of sattva and tamas. And the Shudra varna has 90% tamasic guna. So the mental temperament of a person, the next slide, the mental temperament of a person is what determines which class he or she belongs to. Like we said, it's based on character, not on birth. And so the qualities which make us fit for the different functions that we choose to pursue in society, that's the karmani pravir bhaktani. This verse talks about that, is as we can see in the slide. So the Brahmana karma, that is those who belong to the Brahmana varna, the sattvic component is predominant. So shama, dama, tapa, shaucham, kshanti, arjavam, jnanam, vijnanam, and astikya. All those are the qualities that these people exhibit. The Kshatriya karma people, shauryam, teja, heroism, valor, then drithi, dakshyam, apalayanam, dhanam, and ishvara bhava. And the Vaishya karma people, agriculture, tending cattle, that is krishi, gaurakshyam, vanijyam, and the Shudras, paricharyatmakam, that is service. So all of us are a mixture of sattva, rajas, and tamas. And what we must remember is we should not use this to classify others, but as a reckoner for us to choose the good qualities in each of these and move slowly upwards towards the sattvic guna. So the varna rules recognize that different people can contribute to the good of the society in different ways. And because all of them are given equal, though not identical opportunities. And we must remember that all the functions essential for the health of a society are equally important. The next slide. Do we have a choice of a profession? So we know that, the Brahmana karma with all the sattvic qualities is very good, but do we have a choice? When it comes to the type of karma that we have to undertake, basically, what profession do we choose? More often than not, it's very confusing, especially as we see the youngsters who are on their first, the trajectory to a future. If we are fortunate and we are able to analyze and understand the type of vasanas and temperament within us, then we choose our profession as per our guna and execute it to its perfection, enjoying it also all the time that we are doing it. So this is a guna-based choice. It is the best. It is done as per our inclination. Many times this is not possible. Then the choice can be based on tradition or hereditary lineage. So like the children of parents in a particular profession, we see a lot of doctors, actors, industrialists. They choose to follow the footsteps of their elders as it is convenient. But many times what happens, they suppress their natural inclinations. The third and the most deplorable choice probably is the one which is made exclusively with a materialistic intent, ignoring the guna suitability, like a square peg in a round hole. And this outcome is always very likely to be miserable. Today's rat race and stressful lifestyle is probably an indicator of this kind of a choice that is made. So when one works devotedly, when you look at the guna-based choice, if we are working devotedly in the right environment, as per our inclinations, all our vasanas are exhausted. Whatever vasanas that we come with. And the peace, security, and happiness is inevitable. In the next few verses, Krishna talks about why we must work as per our swabhava. Krishna says, Sve Sve Karmani Abhirataha. Each one who is devoted to his or her own duty attains perfection. We should be loyal to our feelings, and what we refer to often as conscience or gut feeling is probably what we recognize as our swabhava or swadharma. And it may be dangerous to move far away from our swabhava. We should put our heart and soul into our duty that we've chosen and excel in it. So we should be fully engaged, enjoy our work. And this way, samsiddhim labate naraha, man attains perfection. But how does this happen? Next slide. Whatever profession we choose, we have to learn to enjoy and have full commitment. We've seen, never compare our profession with another's, because any type of profession has its own plus points and minus points. Like the fire is enveloped by the smoke. And even though we may see so many defects in our own profession, we should never give it up. So Krishna says, learn to accept it. Don't keep on changing our profession, which is what we are seeing these days is happening. Because the difficulties we can use to accept it as part of our spiritual growth. And if we choose a profession which is based on our swabhava, that is Shreyan, that is the best, he says. And even if it has defects, there is no sin, no kilbisham, because we are dedicating whatever work that we do to the Lord. In fact, Swami Chinmayananda says, the swabhava of each person cannot destroy him. He gives the example of the poison in a snake's fang. That does not kill the snake, nor does the malarial parasite attack the mosquitoes. Moving on, let us see how the karma is converted to karma yoga. So swadharma to karma yoga, work is worship. That is man's homage to God. We have to change our attitude to three things. The first one is karma, the action itself. With the attitude of Ishvara Arpana Bhava, every little thing that we do on a day-to-day basis, from the moment we wake up, can be done as an offering to God. The second aspect of change is towards the karma phalam, the consequence of our actions. So whether it is failure or success, whether it is praise or criticism, whether somebody shows us gratitude or ingratitude, we try to accept it as Ishvara Prasadava. And the third and the most important thing is the karma paladata. We recognize the all-pervading principle. That is, he from whom all beings arise and by whom all this is pervaded. So we constantly remember the higher goal, and we see the Lord in each and everything, person and activity. Like we have seen in the Gita itself in chapter 7, Mai Sarvam Idam Protam. And also the Ishavasya Upanishad opening verse which says, Ishavasyam Idam Sarvam. So we see the Lord in each and everything. And as a result, we attain Siddhim Vindati Manava, Chitta Shuddhi and purification. Moving on, despite all this, Arjuna still wanted, all of us have this, right? Many times when we are overwhelmed with things around us, our work and things at home, we want to have this escapist attitude and run away. So the same thing, what Arjuna faced. So then Sri Krishna says it's better to do one's own dharma and duty even if it is imperfect. Because that way we exhaust all our vasanas if we work in a field which is as per our swabhava. If we work in something which is contrary, it's very likely that we'll add on more and more vasanas and get into this circle of misery. So What then is the benefit of action according to Swabhava and Swadharma? Throughout the Gita, we've seen the emphasis on restraint and freedom from desire, which is essential for spiritual progress. So the karma yogi who has practiced it, all of it as per the teachings, is the one who attains spiritual dignity through subduing his ego. He becomes Jitatma. He has no attachment to anything, the results. That is asakta buddhi, and he is free of desires, vigata spraha. So such a person then attains the supreme goal of inaction through renunciation. Dr. Agde earlier spoke about the law of least effort. He becomes a naishkarmya siddhi. So this is the state of transcending all work. It is not withdrawal from work, but a state of inner renunciation, understanding that silent, calm, actionless state of the consciousness principle. And in this state of freedom from action alone, can we realize Brahman and move towards liberation. Hari Om, thank you.
ब्रह्ममुरारि सुरार्जितलिङ्गं निर्मलभासितशोभितलिङ्गं जन्मज दुःखविनाशकलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं देवमुनिप्रवरार्चितलिङ्गं कामदहनकरुणाकरलिङ्गं रावणदर्पविनाशनलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं सर्वसुगन्धसुलेपितलिङ्गं बुद्धिविवर्धनकारणलिङ्गं सिद्धसुरासुरवन्दितलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं कनकमहामणिभूषितलिङ्गं फणिपतिवेष्टितशोभितलिङ्गं दक्षसुयज्ञविनाशनलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं कुङ्कुमचन्दनलेपितलिङ्गं पङ्कजहारसुशोभितलिङ्गं सञ्चितपापविनाशनलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं देवगणार्चितसेवितलिङ्गं भावैर्भक्तिभिरेव च लिङ्गं दिनकरकोटिप्रभाकरलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गम् अष्टदलोपरिवेष्टितलिङ्गं सर्वसमुद्भवकारणलिङ्गम् अष्टदरिद्रविनाशकलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं सुरगुरुसुरवरपूजितलिङ्गं सुरवनपुष्प सदार्चितलिङ्गं परात्परं परमात्मकलिङ्गं तत्प्रणमामि सदा शिवलिङ्गं लिङ्गाष्टकमिदं पुण्यं यः पठेत् शिवसन्निधौ शिवलोकमवाप्नोति शिवेन सह मोदते शिवेन सह मोदते शिवेन सह मोदते.
Thank you, Indaman, for a divine singing. Thank you all speakers for a wonderful class, and thank you friends for your active participation. On Monday, 8 May 2023, let's log in for a session 58 of Disha for the discovery of inner strength and happiness at 6:45 p.m. In this episode of Disha, we'll continue our study of chapter 13 for our study. With this, let us conclude today's session with our usual Shanti mantra. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Thank you.